Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Clara, 28, and today, my parents told me to hand over my wedding gift card to my sister, Alice, because she apparently deserves it more. The words hit me like a slap, right there in my wedding dress, with Michael's family watching, stunned and speechless. Let me rewind a bit. Just 3 hours before, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Michael's parents had surprised me with keys to a brand new Honda Civic, saying they already saw me as a daughter. They had tears in their eyes, and for someone who'd never owned a car, who'd spent years riding 3 different buses just to get to work while supporting my entire family, it felt like winning the lottery. So, if you've ever been treated like the less deserving one in your own family, stick around, because what happened next will probably sound painfully familiar. Now, you might wonder how a family ends up this dysfunctional. Let me paint you a picture. When I was 19, my dad got hurt on a construction site, broke his leg in 3 places and messed up his back. Workers' comp barely covered the hospital bills, and the mortgage was already overdue. My mom hadn't worked in 20 years, so somebody had to step up. That somebody was me. I dropped out halfway through my accounting degree, said goodbye to college, and started scouring job boards. While my friends were pledging sororities and posting graduation selfies, I was learning to code in public libraries and watching free programming tutorials on YouTube late into the night. Turns out I had a knack for tech. Within 6 months, I landed an entry-level position at a small software company. My boss, Julia, noticed how fast I picked things up. "You're wasted in data entry," she told me after my first review. "I want to move you to the development team." The promotion came with a 30% raise, and for the first time, I thought maybe life was turning around. Then reality hit. "You're so good with money," Mom said one afternoon, handing me a stack of unpaid bills. "Since you're doing so well, you can take care of these." And just like that, I became the family's full-time provider. Dad couldn't work, Mum wouldn't, and Alice, my younger sister, was living like she'd been born royalty. While I spent my 20s paying utilities, mortgage, and medical bills, Vanessa was living the college dream. Dorm parties, spring break trips, shopping sprees. I paid for her tuition, her meal plan, even her textbooks. When she called, it wasn't to ask how Dad's back was healing, it was to ask for more money. "Clara, I need cash for this," or "Can you cover that?" That was the soundtrack of my early 20s, but it wasn't just the money, it was the way she erased me. When her friends visited, she introduced me as my sister who works in computers, not the sister who sacrificed college to keep the lights on, not the sister who gave up her own dreams so she could chase hers, just the one with the boring job. Still, I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once she graduated, she'd help out, and we'd finally share the load. I was wrong. When Vanessa finally walked across that graduation stage, she didn't see our parents as her responsibility. She saw them as mine. She landed a job as a marketing coordinator that summer, decent pay for a beginner. I felt so proud, so relieved, thinking I'd finally get some help. But her first paycheck went toward a designer handbag. "I need to look professional," she said, flaunting her new purse. "Image is everything in marketing." The second paycheck went to a girls' trip in Nashville. The third, a total wardrobe overhaul. Meanwhile, I was still covering the mortgage, groceries, utilities, and Dad's endless physical therapy sessions. When I gently asked if she could chip in, she looked offended. "Clara, I'm just getting started," she said, rubbing some fancy moisturizer into her skin. "You're already handling everything so well." That line became the family's favorite. Dad used it when I asked him to apply for remote jobs. Mom said it whenever I mentioned feeling exhausted. Vanessa repeated it like a mantra anytime money came up. And the sad part? I started believing them. That's the curse of being dependable. People treat your sacrifice like oxygen, vital but invisible. What began as helping became obligation. What started as gratitude turned into entitlement. Without realizing it, I'd become the CFO of my family's comfort, keeping everyone else's lives afloat while mine sank quietly in the background. The breaking point came that first Christmas after Alice's big job offer. I decorated the house, cooked dinner, and even budgeted to buy small gifts for everyone. Vanessa arrived late, dragging a suitcase bigger than her ego, and announced she wouldn't be staying long. "I'm flying to Aspen," she said breezily, showing off her designer luggage. "It's a networking trip." Networking, as in skiing with her college friends, and drinking champagne in mountain lodges while I stayed home, washing dishes, and making sure Mum's prescriptions were refilled. I remember standing there that night, looking at her glittering smile and Dad's approving nod, and realizing that no matter what I gave, it would never be enough. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was the safety net they all stood on, pretending they built their own success. That was the first time I truly felt invisible, and I had no idea it was only the beginning of what my family would take from me. My friend once mentioned that her family had industry connections that could open doors for her, and I couldn't help but think about how different our worlds were. That week, I was pulling double shifts just to make sure I could cover holiday bonuses for Mom and Dad, plus Alice's student loan payment, the one she'd forgotten again. When I asked if she'd chip in for Christmas gifts or even help pay for dinner, she laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "Clara, you know I don't have disposable income right now. I'm saving to move into a more professional apartment. Image matters in my field." Image. That word was like a broken record in her vocabulary. Always image, never effort, always presentation, never substance. She lived in a world of mirrors, and I was the one holding the frame up for her. That night, I sat in my small studio apartment, the same 400 square feet I'd been living in for 6 years, and opened my budgeting spreadsheet. I started calculating. In the 7 years since Dad's accident, I'd poured over $200,000 into keeping our family afloat. Rent, bills, food, insurance, medical costs, tuition, everything. And Alice, not a single dollar. I stared at that number until the digits blurred together, my coffee gone cold on the desk beside me. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to believe things would still change. She's young, I told myself. She just needs to grow up a little, find her footing, learn responsibility. She'll come around. I was still making excuses for people who stopped making any for themselves years ago. 2 years later, everything changed when I met Michael. It was at a tech conference downtown. He was giving a talk on sustainable business practices, and I was there to demo a prototype app my team had been working on. During the coffee break, he walked up to me, genuinely curious about the data visualization tool I'd built. "This could really change how small businesses track their carbon footprint," he said, studying my tablet screen with the kind of focus that felt rare. Most guys at these events tried to explain my own code to me. Mark wanted to understand it. We talked for 3 hours straight, missing half the sessions. He had a dry sense of humor, a calm confidence, and the kind of patience that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. Our first official date was supposed to be dinner, but we ended up at a 24-hour diner instead, talking until the sun came up. He told me about his consulting work with eco-friendly startups. I told him about my projects and how I'd been climbing my way up the industry without a degree. What I didn't mention was the part about supporting my entire family since I was 19. When I finally did tell him, a few months later, I braced for the usual reaction, judgment, advice, or pity. But Mark just looked at me thoughtfully and said, "What do you want to happen?" I blinked. It was such a simple question, but I hadn't heard it in years. Nobody ever asked what I wanted. "I want them to be okay," I said automatically. "That's not what I asked," he replied gently. I asked what you want. It was like he'd hit a switch I didn't know existed. I wanted to finish my degree. I wanted to travel, to see something beyond my neighborhood bus routes. I wanted to buy groceries without doing mental math about which bills would have to wait. I wanted freedom from guilt, from debt, from always being the one holding everything together. The words poured out of me like water from a dam finally cracking. Mark just listened. No judgment, no lectures. When I was done, he said softly, "Wanting something for yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human." Meeting Michael's family was like stepping into another reality. His parents, Alan and Susan, ran a consulting firm together, and they treated me like a peer from the start. They asked about my work, my ideas, my goals. They remembered things I said at dinner and followed up weeks later. They made space for me at the table in every way that mattered. When I mentioned wanting to go back to school someday, Margaret immediately sent me scholarship links. "Clara's brilliant," Mark told them one evening. "She taught herself programming languages most people need degrees to learn." Alan nodded. "Formal education helps, but curiosity and determination can't be taught." I nearly cried into my wine. It was the first time in years that I felt seen, not for what I provided, but for who I was. The contrast hit even harder when Mark met my family. The first thing my mum said wasn't hello. It was, "I hope you understand Clara's very devoted to taking care of us. That won't change just because she's dating someone." No welcome, no warmth, just a territorial warning disguised as small talk. Vanessa spent the entire dinner bragging about her new promotion and her fancy apartment. When Mark asked me about work, Vanessa cut in with a fake laugh. "Oh, Clara's always been the practical one. I'm more of the creative type." Practical. That word again. The polite way of calling someone useful but dull. I smiled through it, but inside, I was burning. Have you ever been invisible in a room full of people you love? It's like shouting underwater. You see their mouths move. You hear muffled echoes of laughter, but no one hears you back. After dinner, as Mark and I walked to his car, he didn't speak for a long time. He just held my hand, and I could feel him processing everything he'd just witnessed. The hierarchy, the dismissiveness, the way I'd been trained to apologize for existing. Finally, he said quietly, "You do realize they're using you, right?" I wanted to argue, to defend them like I always did, but the words caught in my throat. Because deep down, I knew he was right. I'd spent nearly a decade carrying people who never once tried to walk beside me. And for the first time in my life, standing in that cool night air, beside someone who actually saw me, I started to wonder what it might feel like to finally set that weight down. "They don't see you," Mark said finally, his voice soft but firm. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your family," he said. "They don't see you. They only see what you do for them." His words landed like a stone in my stomach because deep down, I knew they were true. But saying it out loud felt like betrayal. After all, these were my parents, my sister, the people I'd built my life around. "But they need me," I whispered. "What kind of daughter just walks away when her family's struggling?" "Clara," he said, stopping right there under the streetlight, his eyes searching mine. "You deserve people who value you for who you are, not just what you can provide." The air between us went still, heavy with truths I wasn't ready to face. And yet, something inside me cracked open, a small space where the possibility of being loved for myself began to breathe. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine what it might feel like to be seen instead of used. 18 months later, Mark proposed. It was during a weekend trip to Napa Valley, one of those golden California evenings where everything seems painted in soft light. We'd just finished dinner at a tiny vineyard restaurant when he dropped to one knee beside the table. I remember his voice trembling slightly, though his eyes were steady. "Clara," he said, "I love how you see the world. I love your determination, your heart, and the way you care about people. But most of all, I love how you make me want to be better. Will you marry me? The ring was perfect, a vintage sapphire surrounded by delicate diamonds, simple but full of meaning. I felt tears spill before I could even speak. Yes, I whispered, then louder, yes. The other diners clapped. The waiter brought champagne, and for those few hours, I felt lighter than air, like life had finally decided to give something back. That feeling didn't last. The next week, we had a small engagement dinner with my family, and within 5 minutes, Mum managed to drain the joy right out of it. When I showed her the ring, she squinted. Well, she said, it's not very big, is it? I forced a laugh. Size isn't everything, Mum. Of course not, dear, she replied sweetly. I just expected something more substantial from someone who can afford it. Is it even real? Before I could answer, Vanessa leaned in. It's cute, she said with a smirk. Very vintage. The way she said it made vintage sound like a polite insult. Meanwhile, Dad had cornered Mark with questions about his income and job stability, as though he were interviewing a loan applicant instead of his future son-in-law. Software consulting can be unstable, Dad said, conveniently forgetting he hadn't worked in years. How do we know you can provide for Clara? Mark handled it gracefully, even as I watched the tension build behind his polite smile. Then Mum dropped the real bomb. So, about the wedding, she began. Vanessa has already started planning your bachelorette party. She'll need a dress, shoes, hair, makeup, the whole package, of course. Wait, I said slowly. Who said Vanessa was my maid of honor? Well, she's your sister, Mom replied as if it were obvious. It would be strange not to have her. I glanced at Alice, who was pretending to look surprised, though it was clear she'd been expecting it. Actually, I said carefully, I was thinking of asking Julia from work. She's been a big support for me these past few years. The temperature in the room dropped like a stone. Mum's smile froze. Julia, she repeated, her tone sharp. A co-worker, instead of your own sister. She's more than a co-worker, I said quietly. She's family in every way that matters. Well, Vanessa chimed in, feigning hurt. I guess Clara's always been closer to outsiders than to her real family. The guilt hit me so hard I almost apologized. Almost. Instead, I said, Vanessa can still be a bridesmaid, but Julia's my maid of honor. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the resentment in the air, thick enough to taste. From that moment on, I knew the wedding would never really belong to me. That night, Mark and I sat in my apartment, the glow from the city lights painting his face in gold and shadow. They're going to try to take over your wedding, he said plainly. They're just excited, I insisted weakly. He shook his head. Clara, they spent the entire night talking about what Vanessa needed and what your parents wanted. Nobody asked what you wanted. I looked down at my hands, twisting the engagement ring nervously. I'll set boundaries, I said, trying to sound confident. There's time. But looking back now, I know how foolish that was. Because if my family had a talent, it was wearing down my boundaries until I surrendered. Over the next 8 months, the wedding turned into a full-scale emotional battlefield. Every choice I made, venue, flowers, food, guest list, became a negotiation I had to lose to keep the peace. Mom insisted we hold the ceremony at her country club. It's where respectable families have their weddings, she said pointedly, as though my modest dream of a small ceremony made me unrefined. When I mentioned the cost, she waved her hand. It's not about money, dear. It's about appearances. Vanessa complained that the bridesmaid dresses I picked were too plain and suggested custom designs that cost triple my budget. When I reminded her she'd promised to pay for her own, she rolled her eyes. I'm the maid of honor. It's different. Mom backed her up, of course. You can afford it, Clara. Don't be petty about details. Meanwhile, Dad wanted to invite his old poker buddies, and Mum added half her book club to the list for appearances. My side of the guest list ballooned to include people I barely knew, while Michael's requests for simplicity were ignored entirely. Every conversation ended in guilt. Every compromise felt like surrender. I'd come home from fittings and planning meetings exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and Mark would just hold me and say, "You know this is supposed to be your wedding, right?" I'd nod, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Somewhere between my mother's expectations and Alice's theatrics, my dream wedding had been hijacked. I was just the face attached to it, the one footing the bill and smiling through gritted teeth. There were nights I sat awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was worth it, if marrying Mark meant bringing him into the chaos I'd spent my whole life trying to manage. But every time I thought about walking away, I remembered that moment under the streetlight when Mark told me I deserved to be valued for who I was, and I realized I couldn't keep letting my family define me. For once in my life, I needed to stand my ground. I just didn't know yet how much it would cost me to do it. "What will people think if you get married in some trendy downtown loft?" my mother demanded, as though the idea alone might permanently tarnish our family name. I'd wanted something intimate, something that felt like me, but that didn't fit their vision of what a respectable wedding should look like. The guest list was supposed to cap at 50 close friends and relatives, yet somehow it ballooned to 120, filled with my parents' co-workers, former neighbors, and business contacts. People whose names I barely recognized were suddenly being labeled must-invites. When I asked why my dad's old boss from 15 years ago was on the list, he gave me a condescending smile. "Networking is important, Clara. You never know what connections might help Michael's business." I stared at him, stunned. "You mean our wedding is now a networking event?" He shrugged. "It's an opportunity, honey. You shouldn't waste it." The cake became the next battlefield. I'd picked something simple, vanilla sponge with raspberry filling, covered in smooth white buttercream, elegant, personal, timeless. Vanessa wrinkled her nose. "What about a 3-tier chocolate fountain?" she suggested during a planning meeting, scrolling through Pinterest. "Or one of those naked cakes with flowers on top. Something Instagram-worthy." I sighed. "I don't want Instagram-worthy, Alice. I just want something that tastes good." She gave me a look that said she pitied me. "Clara, this is your wedding. Don't you want it to be memorable?" The implication stung. Apparently my preferences weren't interesting enough. My taste wasn't creative enough. What I wanted wasn't memorable. Meanwhile, Mark was reaching his breaking point. "This is supposed to be our day," he said one night after yet another argument about flower arrangements. "Why does it feel like we're planning their wedding?" "They're just trying to help," I said weakly, though even I didn't believe it anymore. He shook his head. "No, helping means asking what you want. This is about control." He was right. Every time I tried to draw a line, they found a way to blur it. The final straw came during my last dress fitting. I'd chosen a gown that felt right the second I saw it, soft ivory, a classic silhouette, nothing flashy, just simple beauty. When I stepped out of the dressing room, the seamstress beamed. "It's perfect," she said, fussing with the hem. I actually felt beautiful, confident even. That lasted all of 5 minutes. Vanessa had tagged along for moral support, but as soon as the seamstress stepped away, she circled me like a shark. "Are you sure about this style?" she asked. "It's very safe." I met her gaze in the mirror. "Safe is fine. I feel good in it." She tilted her head. "It's your wedding day, Clara. Don't you want to make a statement?" "What kind of statement?" "Something that shows you belong in Michael's world. This dress says dependable employee, not confident bride." There it was, dependable, the word that followed me everywhere. Dependable, reliable, predictable. It sounded like a compliment, but always felt like an insult. I tried to brush it off, but her words stuck like burrs in my mind. "Maybe I am dependable," I said, half to myself. She smirked. "Come on, Clara. You're marrying into success. This is your chance to prove you fit in." I stood there silently as the seamstress returned with her pins, but the damage was already done. That night, I called Mark in tears. She's in my head, I confessed. What if she's right? What if I'm not enough for your family? Clara, stop, he said gently but firmly. My parents adore you. They've told me a dozen times how lucky I am. Do you love your dress? Yes. Do you feel beautiful in it? Yes. Then that's all that matters. Alice's opinion doesn't count. He was right, but I couldn't shake the insecurity she'd planted. I realized later that was exactly her goal, to keep me doubting myself so she could feel superior. By the time the wedding day arrived, I was running on nerves and caffeine. The morning sunlight streamed through the window as I got ready, surrounded by Julia, my loyal maid of honor, and a few close friends. Michael's parents had gifted me a spa day the week before, and I'd actually felt calm for the first time in months. Everything should have been perfect, but at 11 a.m., just 2 hours before the ceremony, my phone rang. Mom. I hesitated before answering, already bracing for impact. Clara, we have a problem, she said, skipping any greeting. Your father's suit doesn't fit, the pants are too long, and the jacket's tight across the shoulders. I blinked. Okay. Did you call the tailor? They can't see him until Monday, she snapped. He can't walk you down the aisle looking sloppy. I took a slow breath, forcing calm into my voice. Mom, what exactly do you want me to do? I'm getting my hair done. Vanessa found someone who can fix it this morning, she said hurriedly. But they need $200 cash, and none of us have that on hand. Of course, I should have seen it coming. Mom, my budget's tapped out. I don't have that kind of extra cash today. Can't Michael's parents help? She asked innocently, as if it were the most reasonable suggestion in the world. We can't ask them for money, I said, disbelief creeping into my tone. It's our wedding day. Clara, this is your father, she snapped. He's supposed to walk you down the aisle. How will that look if his suit doesn't fit? I closed my eyes. The manipulation was so predictable it almost made me laugh. It wasn't about Dad's suit, it was about control. It always was. But even knowing that, I couldn't bring myself to hang up. Fine, I said finally. I'll get the cash. I texted Julia, who, without a single complaint, ran out to withdraw the money. When she returned, I hugged her so hard she nearly dropped her purse. You don't deserve this stress, she whispered. I nodded, swallowing tears. I know. As I sat there in front of the mirror, makeup half finished, I caught my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, yet I looked exhausted, emotionally drained, hollow-eyed. I wanted to feel joy, but all I felt was pressure. Somewhere between the arguments over venues, dresses, and cake flavors, I'd lost sight of what the day was really about. It wasn't supposed to be about image or approval or managing egos. It was supposed to be about love. And I silently promised myself that once I walked down that aisle, everything would change. I didn't yet know how much truth there was in that thought, or how high the price of keeping that promise would be. What will people think of us? Mom had said earlier, her favorite phrase when she wanted to guilt me into compliance. What would people think? They'd think my family was manipulative, selfish, and completely incapable of taking responsibility for their own choices, which would be 100% correct. But instead of saying that, I found myself grabbing my purse and asking Julia to drive me to the ATM. She shot me a look as we stood in line, tapping her foot impatiently. This is ridiculous, Clara, she said flatly. Your dad had months to make sure his suit fit. This isn't your emergency. I sighed. I know, but if he looks sloppy, walking me down the aisle, it'll somehow become my fault. She crossed her arms. Or you could let him deal with the consequences of his own poor planning. I gave her a sad smile. You know I won't. Because I knew exactly how that would go. Mom's teary accusations, Dad's silent disappointment, Alice's passive-aggressive comments about how I'd ruined the day. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. It always was. Julia came back from delivering the cash, looking furious. Clara, she said, shutting the door behind her, your sister wasn't at the tailor. I froze. What do you mean? I mean, she said, pulling out her phone like she had receipts. I just saw Vanessa at the nail salon, getting a manicure. She waved at me through the window. My stomach dropped. So, the tailor didn't exist, Julia said. Your parents lied to you. Again. I sat down hard in the vanity chair, still in my robe, my hair half pinned, and stared at my reflection. They lied to me, I said softly, barely recognizing the voice that came out. Yes, Julia said gently, and they did it on your wedding day. I stared into my own eyes in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt disgust, not at them, at myself, because I'd let them. Again. In a few hours, I'd be Emma Patterson, wife to a man who respected me, who saw me. But before I could start that new chapter, I had to make it through a ceremony surrounded by people who saw me as an endless source of favors and money. Julia, I said quietly. Yeah? After today, I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror, things are going to be different. She smiled faintly. Good. About time. The ceremony itself was beautiful, the kind of day that makes you forget how messy life can be. The air smelled like roses and champagne. Sunlight poured through the stained glass. And when I walked down the aisle, Michael's eyes filled with tears. For a brief, perfect moment, everything else melted away. It was just him and me. Every doubt, every argument, every manipulation faded beneath the simple truth that this man loved me. For me. I saw his mother dab at her eyes as she whispered something to his father, and for once, I allowed myself to believe I deserved this happiness. The reception was a blur of laughter, toasts, and clinking glasses. I was still glowing from the first dance when Susan, my new mother-in-law, approached the microphone. Mark and I have a small surprise for our new daughter, she said, smiling warmly at me. Then Alan appeared, holding a small velvet box, and inside were car keys. Clara, Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion, you've been like the daughter we never had. We know how much you've done for others, and we want you to have something that's just yours. A car. My own car. For most people, it's just a vehicle. For me, it was independence. No more buses, no more scheduling my life around everyone else's needs. Just me, behind the wheel of something that symbolized freedom. My breath caught as I hugged them both, tears streaming down my face. Thank you, I whispered. You have no idea what this means. For the first time in years, I felt pure happiness, but I should have known my family wouldn't let that last. I saw them approaching before I even heard them. Mom's tight smile, Dad's forced cheerfulness. Clara, Mom said in that syrupy voice she used before delivering bad news, we need to talk, privately. My stomach twisted. I followed them to a quiet corner near the dessert table, where the music was softer and the guests were too busy to notice. Dad cleared his throat. That was such a lovely gesture from the Pattersons, he began. They're very generous people. Yes, I said cautiously, they are. The thing is, Mum continued smoothly, your sister's starting her new job downtown next month, remember? I nodded slowly. Vanessa had finally landed that marketing job she'd been bragging about for weeks. A job I'd helped her prepare for, staying up late running mock interviews and proofreading her portfolio. She's going to need reliable transportation, Mom went on, clasping her hands together like she was praying. You know how unreliable public transit can be, especially for a young woman trying to make a good impression at a new company. The pieces fell into place so fast I actually felt dizzy. What exactly are you asking me? I said quietly, though I already knew. We think it would be wonderful if you gave Vanessa the car, Mom said sweetly, like she was suggesting something completely reasonable. After all, you've managed fine without one for years. You're used to it. Dad nodded solemnly. Vanessa needs this to succeed, Clara. You can understand that. For a moment I couldn't speak. I just looked at them, their calm, expectant faces, as though what they were asking wasn't cruel, wasn't insulting, wasn't the final straw in a decade-long pattern of selfishness. You can't be serious, I said finally, my voice low. Dad's tone hardened instantly. Clara, be reasonable. Vanessa deserves this opportunity. Mum nodded. She's worked so hard. She's trying to better herself. Something inside me snapped. Worked hard, I repeated. You mean the same sister who spent years living off my paycheck while I paid her tuition, her rent, her food? The one who's never once paid back a dime. Clara, Mum hissed, glancing around nervously, keep your voice down. No, I said, my voice rising. You keep your voice down. You want me to hand over the first gift I've ever received that wasn't conditional, that wasn't tied to guilt or obligation, and you want to give it to the one person who's never sacrificed anything. Mum's expression turned cold. She deserves it more than you do, she said simply. The words hung there like poison in the air, and for once I didn't swallow them. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I just looked her straight in the eye and said, "You're wrong." Then I turned and walked back toward the dance floor, where Mark was waiting for me. Behind me, I heard Mum whisper something sharp to Dad, but I didn't turn around. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought, because in that moment, I realized something that had taken me 28 years to learn. Love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. It means being seen, respected, and valued. And for the first time, I was ready to stop giving those things away to people who'd never earned them. Those words hit like a punch to the gut. After everything I'd done, every late night, every sacrifice, every dollar funneled into their lives, my own mother looked me in the eye and said, my sister deserved my wedding gift more than I did. More than me, I repeated, my voice empty. Well, yes, Mum said, tone perfectly reasonable, as if this weren't the most absurd thing I'd ever heard. Vanessa is just starting out. You're established now. You have Mark to take care of you. There it was again, the same belief that had dictated my entire life. I existed to serve until someone else could assume the duty. My worth was purely functional, never personal. I scanned the reception hall, trying to ground myself in the chaos. Mark was across the room laughing with his college friends, oblivious to the ambush unfolding near the dessert table. Vanessa was posing for photos with the bridesmaids, holding a champagne glass like she'd won the day. Julia was dancing with her husband, finally unwinding after months of helping me manage this circus. And there I stood, cornered between the dessert trays and my parents' expectations. Clara, Mum's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp now. We're waiting for an answer. For a moment, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. What did they expect me to say? Sure, Mum. I'll just hand over my one symbol of freedom to the same sister who's taken everything else from me. But before I could respond, I felt a familiar warmth on my shoulder. Michael's hand. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed my parents. Excuse me, he said with perfect politeness, but I need to borrow my wife for a moment. They're about to cut the cake. He didn't wait for a response, just guided me away, his hand steady against my back. I caught the flash of irritation on Mom's face as we walked off. She wasn't done, and we both knew it. How much did you hear? I asked quietly. Enough, he said, his jaw tightening. They want you to give Vanessa the car. I nodded. They think she deserves it more than I do. Mark stopped mid-step and turned to face me fully. Clara, he said softly but with an edge that told me he was furious on my behalf. Look at me. Do you want to give her that car? No, I said instantly without hesitation. I've never wanted anything that was mine so badly in my entire life. His eyes softened. Then don't. But they'll be furious, I whispered. They'll call me selfish. Let them, he said. Let them say whatever they want. That car is yours. Standing there in my wedding dress, surrounded by flowers and music and laughter, I felt something solidify inside me. A sharp, crystalline realization. Mark was right. The car was mine. The gift was mine. The choice was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to say no. The cake cutting passed in a haze. I smiled for photos, fed Mark a bite, laughed at his frosting-covered nose, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation over and over. How would my parents react when I refused? Would they yell, cry, freeze me out completely? Probably all three. And yet, under the anxiety, another feeling stirred: anger. Not the quiet, repressed kind I'd carried for years, but something fierce and clean. The audacity of asking me to hand over my own wedding gift was staggering, even for them. The cruelty of implying Vanessa was more deserving cut deeper than anything they'd ever said. Later, during the dancing, Margaret and Alan pulled me aside. "Clara, dear," Margaret said gently, "I hope you know how much it means to us to give you that gift." Her eyes shone with emotion. "We've watched you give so much of yourself to others, and we wanted you to have something that's just yours." Alan nodded. "You don't need to thank us, Clara. You're family now. And family looks out for each other without keeping score." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's perfect," I said truthfully. "Thank you, I mean it." Their kindness hit me hard, because it came with no strings, no expectations. Just love. It was such a foreign concept I barely knew how to hold it. Across the room, I caught sight of my parents standing with Vanessa near the bar. They were huddled close, whispering, strategizing. Occasionally, one of them would glance at me, and I could almost hear the conversation. How do we convince her? How do we spin this? The scheming never stopped. It just changed tactics. Their next move came during the bouquet toss. As the DJ gathered single women to the dance floor, Mom materialized beside me, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Clara," she said smoothly, "have you thought about what we discussed earlier?" I didn't hesitate this time. "Yes," I said, "and the answer is no." The fake smile faltered. "Excuse me?" I said no, I'm keeping the car. Her pleasant mask slipped completely. "Clara, don't be ridiculous. We've already told Vanessa she can have it. She's planning her commute around it." "Then you shouldn't have made promises about something that doesn't belong to you," I said, turning just as the DJ announced it was time. Julia caught the bouquet, laughing, waving it like a trophy. For a second, the whole room cheered, and I let myself laugh too. But when I turned back, my parents weren't celebrating. They were staring at me like I'd committed treason, shock, anger, and something else I hadn't seen before. Fear. Maybe for the first time, they realized their control over me was slipping. Dad recovered first, his tone clipped. "We'll discuss this tomorrow." I met his gaze evenly. "No, we won't. The discussion is over." And before they could say another word, I walked away. I rejoined Mark on the dance floor, forcing myself to smile as he spun me into a slow waltz, but I could feel their eyes burning holes into my back. An hour later, as the guests began to trickle out, the confrontation I'd been dreading finally arrived. Mom caught me just outside the ballroom doors, her voice low but trembling with anger. "You embarrassed us tonight," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how ungrateful you looked?" I met her glare, with calm I didn't know I possessed. "No, Mom," I said. "For once, I think I looked exactly how I should." I walked away, leaving her standing there, speechless. In that moment, something inside me broke free. The old version of myself, the one who always caved, who always apologized, who always paid the price for their comfort. She didn't walk out of that reception hall with me. I left her there, between the dessert table and the empty champagne glasses, and stepped into my new life. Vanessa cornered me while Mark was saying goodbye to his college friends. "Mom said you're being difficult about the car," she began. "I'm not being difficult," I said calmly. "I'm keeping my wedding gift." Her mask of concern dropped instantly. "Come on, Clara. You don't even need a car. You live near work, and Mark already has one." I stared at her. "Alice, I've taken 3 buses to work for 8 years. I think I've earned my own set of keys." She folded her arms. "But I need it more. My new job is a big opportunity. Image matters in advertising." There it was again. The same old narrative that my life, my needs, my comfort were secondary to hers. "You know what?" I said quietly. "Figure it out yourself. like I had to. Her eyes went wide, as if I'd just spoken another language. Clara, what's gotten into you? This isn't like you. She was right. The old me would have caved by now, smiled through the resentment, and handed her the keys, while telling myself it was the right thing to do. But that version of me had disappeared somewhere between, she deserves it more than you, and I'm your wife, not your caretaker. I looked her straight in the eye. Maybe it's time you met the new me. The honeymoon in Costa Rica felt like a lifetime's worth of exhale. For 7 days, I remembered what peace felt like, hiking misty trails, reading by the ocean, sleeping without dread in my chest. My phone stayed off, and for the first time in years, nobody needed saving. You seem different here, Mark said one evening as we watched the sun sink into the water. Different how? I asked, smiling. Lighter, he said simply. Like you finally put something down. He was right. I'd been carrying my family's expectations so long, I didn't realize how heavy they were until I set them down. For the first time in forever, I felt like myself. Reality, of course, was waiting back home. 17 missed calls from my mother, 12 from Alice. A barrage of texts that started guilt-tripping before I'd even unpacked. Clara, call me immediately. Your sister's crying. I hope you're happy. This is not how we raised you. The last one made me laugh out loud. Mark is turning you against your family. I showed the messages to him, and he shook his head. They're blaming me for your backbone, he said. Apparently, thinking for yourself is an outside influence. Are you going to call them back? He asked. I thought about it. The old Emma would have called instantly, apologized, tried to make peace. But the new Clara, she had laundry to do. Eventually, I said, just not today. We spent the day unpacking, turning our apartment into a home. Wedding photos on the wall, books we'd picked together, gifts still stacked by the dining table. When I opened the envelope from Alan and Susan, the car title in my name, Emma Patterson, I felt something new, ownership, not just of the car, but of my choices. The next morning, I drove to work for the first time. The commute that used to take over an hour now took 22 minutes. I parked, walked in early, and for once didn't feel exhausted. Julia looked up as I entered. Look at you, she said with a grin. Married life suits you. It's not just married life, I said, smiling. It's having a car. I forgot what freedom felt like. Talked to your family yet? Nope, I said, pouring my coffee. And I don't plan to anytime soon. Julia nodded. Good, let them sit with it for a while. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't reflect. My family didn't do accountability. They did blame. And now, I was the villain for doing the one thing they couldn't, putting myself first. That evening, while Mark and I were cooking dinner, my phone lit up again. Clara. My mother's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. It's time we talked. Hello, Mom. How are you? I said evenly. Don't you? Hello, Mom, me. Do you have any idea what you've put this family through? I glanced at Michael, who was chopping vegetables with the kind of focus usually reserved for crime scenes. I took a deep breath. I think I do, I said. For once, you're the ones who can't handle it. Even Mark was getting tired of my family's constant drama. What exactly have I put you through? I asked. Mum didn't hesitate. Vanessa started her new job yesterday. Do you know how she got there? She had to take 2 buses and walk 4 blocks in heels. She was nearly late because of your selfishness. I almost laughed out loud. Somehow, Alice's commute was now my fault. Mom, I said evenly, Vanessa is a grown woman with a degree and a good job. She can figure it out. Her voice turned sharp. I don't know what's happened to you, Clara, but this isn't the daughter I raised. You're right, I said quietly. The daughter you raised would have already given Vanessa the car. She'd have apologized for wanting something of her own. She'd have made everyone else's problems her responsibility. And what's wrong with that? Family comes first. When was the last time any of you asked how I was doing, or celebrated anything I achieved, or cared what I wanted? Silence. That's what I thought, I said and hung up. 3 weeks later, Vanessa showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her looking frazzled and tense, her usual confidence gone. "We need to talk," she said. "Come in," I replied. Her eyes darted straight to the car keys on the counter. "So, you're really keeping it?" "Yes, Alice, I am." "Do you know what the last few weeks have been like for me?" she demanded. "I've been taking buses to work. Do you know how exhausting that is? How unprofessional it looks when I show up sweaty and frazzled?" "I couldn't help it," I laughed. "Actually, I do. I lived that way for 8 years." "That's different," she shot back. "How?" "You're used to it. I'm not." There it was, the truth laid bare. Vanessa genuinely believed she deserved better simply because she was Alice. "You're right," I said calmly. "I was used to it, used to sacrificing, used to being taken for granted, but I'm done being used to it." Her expression cracked. "Fine. Keep the stupid car, but don't expect me to forgive you." "I don't," I said simply. "In fact, I don't think there's much between us left to forgive. When was the last time you called me just to talk, or thanked me for anything I've done, or showed any interest in my life that didn't involve you needing something?" Vanessa stared at me, speechless. "That's not true," she muttered weakly. "Then name one time." She couldn't. "Didn't think so," I said. "Clara, you're being ridiculous. Of course I care about you. Caring about someone and caring about what they can do for you aren't the same thing." Her face flushed. "You know what? Maybe we shouldn't be sisters anymore." The old me would have panicked at those words. This me just felt relief. "Maybe we shouldn't," I agreed. Vanessa blinked, stunned. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. "I don't understand what happened to you," she said finally. "I grew up," I replied. "I realized I deserve better than being treated like the family ATM." "Nobody treated you like an ATM," she said defensively. "Really? When was the last time you paid for Mum and Dad's bills?" "I just started my career." "You graduated 3 years ago. You were getting established with money I provided." She scoffed. "That's what family does." "No, Alice," I said quietly. "That's what I did. You took. There's a difference." She stared at me for a long moment, trying to find a version of the story where she was still the victim. "Mark really changed you," she said bitterly. "No," I replied. "He just showed me what it feels like to be valued." She grabbed her purse and moved toward the door. "Mum and Dad are really hurt, you know." "They'll live," I said. "Will they? Dad's talking about taking on more debt to help me buy a car. His back can't handle more work, but he's considering it because of your selfishness." I almost laughed again. "If Dad takes on debt, that's his choice. You don't get to pin that on me." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, opening the door for her. "But at least it'll be my regret." She stormed out without another word. And when the door closed behind her, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Dad was going to risk his health because I wouldn't give up my wedding gift. And somehow, that was my fault. "Alice, you have a job now," I said evenly. "You can get your own car loan." "With what credit?" she snapped. "I don't have any credit history, because you've been paying for everything." Exactly. She'd never had to stand on her own 2 feet. "Then maybe it's time you started building some," I said, closing the door firmly. Through the peephole, I watched her stand there for several minutes, probably waiting for me to come running with an apology. I didn't. 2 months later came the final confrontation, Dad's birthday dinner. Mom had called to invite us, and after talking it over with Michael, I decided to go. I missed my father despite everything, and part of me hoped we could patch things up. I was wrong. At first, it seemed fine. Dad was genuinely glad to see me, and we talked about his physical therapy and my work. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd moved past the car. Then Vanessa arrived and the air turned cold. She'd brought her new boyfriend, Lucas, a finance guy with expensive tastes, and a BMW parked outside. "Lucas, this is my sister Clara," she said sweetly, "the one I told you about." Whatever she'd told him clearly wasn't kind. Dinner became a performance. Vanessa kept dropping passive-aggressive lines about her transportation struggles and how some family members can't be counted on. Michael's jaw tightened with each jab, but I stayed calm. Her words didn't sting anymore. They just sounded small. The blow-up came at dessert. "Vanessa has some wonderful news," Mom announced. Vanessa smiled like a pageant queen. "Lucas and I are moving in together. He's helping me buy a car, so I won't have to rely on unreliable family members anymore." The dig was obvious, but I just smiled. "That's great, Alice. I'm happy you found a solution." "Yes, well," she said, her voice sharp, "some of us have to look outside the family for support." "Alice," Dad warned, but she pushed on. "It's funny how someone can claim to love their family but refuse to help when it matters." "That's enough," Mark said firmly. "Oh, the supportive husband speaks," she sneered. "Tell me, do you enjoy turning my sister against her family?" "I enjoy supporting my wife's right to make her own choices," he said calmly. "Even when those choices hurt the people who raised her?" Mom asked coldly. "Especially then, if those people have been taking advantage of her for years," Mark shot back. The room went dead silent. "Taking advantage?" Mom repeated, her tone dangerous. Mark didn't flinch. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson. Emma has supported this family for nearly a decade. She gave up her education and her independence to keep you all afloat. The least you could do is respect her right to keep her own wedding gift." "How dare you," Dad snapped, standing up. "How dare you come into our home and judge us?" "I'm not judging," Mark said evenly. "I'm stating facts." "Michael, stop," I said softly, but he wasn't finished. "Do you know what Emma was doing while Vanessa was in college?" he asked. "Working 2 jobs to pay for Alice's dorm and meal plan. Do you know what she was doing while Vanessa was on vacation in Cancun, covering your mortgage? While Vanessa was building her career online, Emma was paying your bills." "We never asked her to," Mom protested. "You didn't have to," Mark said. "You expected it, and she delivered. But now she's married to someone who values her, and suddenly you can't control her anymore." The silence was crushing. Finally, Dad said through clenched teeth, "I think you should leave." "Gladly," Mark replied, rising. I stood slowly, looking around the table. Dad's face was red with anger. Mom looked stunned. Vanessa was crying into Lucas' shoulder. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and here they were treating me like a stranger for daring to set boundaries. "You're right," I said quietly. "We should go." "Clara, wait," Dad said, his voice softening. "Don't let him turn you against us." I looked at him. This man who'd taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework, and walked me down the aisle just 3 months ago. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "he didn't turn me against you. You did that all by yourselves." And then I finally said the words that had been waiting in me for years. Simple, honest, and final. I'm done being the only one who sacrifices. I'm done. I'm done being the family bank. I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done sacrificing my happiness for people who don't even see me as a person. "Clara, you don't mean that," Mom said desperately. "I do," I said. "The financial support stops now. The guilt trips stop now. The constant availability stops now." I took Michael's hand and walked toward the door. "If you ever want a relationship with me based on mutual respect and love, you know how to reach me. But if you just want your personal ATM back, don't bother calling." We left them sitting at the dinner table, probably for the first time forced to face what they'd done to me. The drive home was silent. Mark held my hand as he drove. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said, and I meant it. That was 2 years ago. The silence from my family lasted 6 months, the longest peace I'd ever known. In that time, I learned who I was without being everyone's safety net. I finished my bachelor's degree at night while working full-time, and Mark cheered me on through every exam. When I graduated summa cum laude, his parents threw me a party. My own parents didn't even send a text. Soon after, I got promoted to senior developer with a raise that finally reflected my worth. For the first time in my adult life, I had money that was truly mine. Money for books, travel, and quiet mornings without guilt. Mark and I bought a small house, a cozy 3-bedroom with a garden and space that felt like ours. We painted the rooms together, argued over paint swatches, laughed over takeout, and built a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval. The first hint of my family came through Julia. "You won't believe this," she said over lunch. "Vanessa called me." I froze. What did she want? "Information about you. Apparently she's struggling. Lucas left her, and she's drowning in car payments and credit card debt. She asked if you might be willing to help." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "And what did you tell her?" "That she had some nerve." "What did she say?" "That family is supposed to forgive and forget." I shook my head. Convenient how that only applies when she needs something. A month later, Mum called. "Clara, I think it's time we talked." "I agree," I said cautiously. "Could you come to dinner this weekend? Just family." "Will you be asking me for money?" "Clara, it's a simple question, Mom. Are you inviting me because you miss me or because Vanessa needs something?" A long pause. "Both." I had to give her credit for honesty, even if it stung. "Then my answer is no. Clara, she's really struggling. She can't keep up with the car payments. She might lose everything." "That sounds like a problem she created for herself." "She's your sister." "A sister who told me we shouldn't be family anymore. I'm just respecting her wishes." "She was upset," Mom said quickly. "She didn't mean it." "Actually, I think she did. And I think it's the most honest thing she's ever said to me." There was another pause. "What would it take for you to forgive her?" I hadn't expected that. A genuine apology, acknowledgement of how she treated me, proof she's learning to be responsible. "Then maybe we can talk." "And you'd help her?" "I didn't say that," I replied. "That's what it would take to have a relationship with her again, not to bail her out. But if you don't help her, she'll lose everything." "Then maybe she'll learn what I learned at 19, that losing everything teaches you who you really are." We talked for another hour, but it was clear Mum didn't want a daughter. She wanted her problem solver back. That version of me was gone. 6 months later, the breakthrough came from the last person I expected, Dad. "Clara," he said over the phone, "I owe you an apology." I almost dropped the receiver. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said at my birthday dinner, about how we treated you, and I think you were right." I sat down, stunned. "I'm listening." He took a shaky breath. "Your mother and I got so used to you fixing everything that we forgot you were our daughter, not our employee. We forgot you had dreams of your own." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "And Alice, we spoiled her. We let her believe the world owed her something. We never taught her responsibility because you were always there to carry it for her." He paused, voice breaking. "I'm proud of you, Clara. It took guts to do what you did. I should have told you that 2 years ago." We talked for 3 hours that night. For the first time in decades, it wasn't about money, favors, or guilt. It was about understanding. And when I hung up, I felt something I never expected to feel again. Not anger, not bitterness, peace. Maybe for the first time since I was a kid, I finally felt at peace with them, and with myself. Dad opened up about how helpless he'd felt after his accident, how my support had kept him afloat financially, but had chipped away at his pride and our relationship. He said watching Vanessa sink into debt made him realize they'd failed her too, by never teaching her how to stand on her own. When Mum called a week later, her apology wasn't as graceful as Dad's, but it was real. She admitted she'd always envied my independence and intelligence. And somewhere deep down, she'd tried to keep me tethered to the family by making me indispensable. Vanessa took the longest. When she finally called, her apology was awkward and half-hearted, full of excuses and pauses. But it was something. A beginning. Now, 3 years after that explosive birthday dinner, my family and I are in a different place. Smaller, quieter, more honest. Dad and I talk every Sunday about his freelance consulting work and whatever project I'm coding at the moment. Mom and I trade recipes and gardening tips. Simple things, no hidden agendas. Vanessa and I keep it polite. We're not close, and maybe we never will be, but the resentment's gone. That's progress. The car, the gift that started all of this, is still in my garage, sitting proudly with over 50,000 miles on it. I've driven it everywhere, to new jobs, to road trips, to quiet dinners with Michael. Every mile feels like a reminder of the day I finally chose myself. Mark and I are expecting our first child this fall. We've already promised that our kid will grow up knowing their worth isn't measured by what they can do for others. They'll learn that love isn't about sacrifice, it's about respect. That helping doesn't mean losing yourself. That boundaries aren't walls, they're signs of self-respect. That car wasn't just a wedding gift, it was a symbol of freedom, proof that love built on respect can withstand pressure, guilt, and manipulation. My family tried to take it from me, but what they were really trying to take was my independence, my identity, my right to say no. And I'm grateful they failed. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever felt trapped by expectations or learned to stand up for yourself, remember this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their worst habits. You can't control how others treat you, but you can control what you allow. And once you choose yourself, you never go back.